At the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule came to a close. Huge crowds gathered at the Red Fort in Delhi, celebrating the birth of an independent nation. Inside the capital, the political elite officially took power. Addressing the Constituent Assembly, Jawaharlal Nehru declared that the country was stepping into the lamps of good fortune. But just miles outside New Delhi, civil administration had completely collapsed. Local authorities lost control, and extreme communal violence erupted almost instantly. Within months, 15 million people were forced to abandon their homes. They gathered whatever they could carry and fled across newly drawn national borders in a state of absolute terror. The Indian independence movement achieved its goal through mass nonviolent resistance. Yet the immediate result of that victory was one of the most devastating humanitarian crises in modern history. To understand why, we have to look at how that independence was actually won and how it was ultimately negotiated. By the mid-1940s, the resistance had reached a scale that began to overwhelm the colonial administration. For decades, the movement had been scaling up, transitioning from local grievances into a national network of dissent. Mahatma Gandhi organized this mobilization around the principle of satyagraha. By refusing to cooperate with British institutions and using strict nonviolent resistance, the population began to paralyze the colonial state. A major part of this effort relied on millions of women. They left their traditional roles in domestic life to picket shops, boycott British goods, and physically occupy the streets. When British authorities jailed the male leadership, these women took over the logistics of the resistance. They smuggled messages, maintained supply lines, and operated underground radio networks to keep the public informed. Other factions took a highly aggressive approach. Leaders like Subhash Chandra Bose formed the Indian National Army, raising regiments of captured soldiers to fight the British military directly. This unified front, spanning men, women, and all major religious groups, reached a point where the mechanics of British colonial rule could no longer function. By the end of the Second World War, Britain was heavily in debt and exhausted. They recognized they lacked the resources and the manpower to maintain control against this level of coordinated resistance. The British War Cabinet sent Lord Mountbatten to New Delhi to negotiate a rapid withdrawal. Their primary goal was a quick, face-saving exit. The British offer came with a strict condition. They would only hand over power if the subcontinent was partitioned into 2 distinct nations. This top-down political requirement fractured the grassroots movement. Communities that had spent decades working together to expel the British were suddenly forced to organize along religious lines to secure their future in the new states. British bureaucrats were assigned to draw the new international borders. They had exactly 9 weeks to divide massive, complex provinces like Punjab and Bengal. This animated map shows how the Boundary Commission approached the problem. They relied almost entirely on a blunt demographic metric. If an area had a Muslim majority, it was assigned to Pakistan. Non-Muslim areas went to India. They drew a jagged line through the middle of the province. That crude logic ignored the reality on the ground. For example, large Sikh populations with deep historical and economic ties to the city of Lahore were suddenly stranded. Their homes were now located inside a foreign country. When these borders were published, panic set in. Armed militias formed immediately, violently driving out minority groups to consolidate control over their side of the new boundary. Archival records from the period document the terror. Citizens crowded onto trains and railway platforms, trying to escape the violence, though many of those trains were ambushed along the way. The women and grassroots organizers who had sustained the independence strikes found themselves in the crossfire. The movement they built resulted in their own displacement. Mass mobilization forced the empire to retreat, but rushed, elite-driven negotiations that followed prioritized a swift exit over the safety of the population. The freedom won by the people was fractured by the careless strokes of a pen.